Hi guys, it's Jason here at RPM. Today we're going to be installing these charge tubes on our 120 horsepower base model Can-Am X3. The charge tubes install the same on all Can-Am X3s, assuming you have an intercooler. If you have a 120 horsepower model or the new 135s, you won't have charge tubes. We do sell a blow-off valve kit though that does include the charge tube, but there's no intercooler, so it's just one single tube going from the turbo to the throttle body on those 120 and 135 kits. Regardless, this is our reinforced silicone. This is hands down the strongest silicone on the market for the Can-Am platform. It is 5-ply and wire reinforced, so there's no swelling of these charge tubes. The fact that they're thicker alone makes them stronger, and then the wire bands just make them insanely bulletproof as far as silicone goes. We like silicone because it can flex and it can move still. This was part of our 120 horsepower upgrade kit as well. This video really can be used for any Can-Am X3. So this is a 120 car and we've been slowly upgrading it. We did a last video on installing the intercooler itself and the fan and getting it plugged in. And now we'll be checking out the charge tubes. So we didn't have anything to remove, but if you do have a stock car, you will be removing your charge tubes. And one thing we like to note is that we do not use this hanger. The reason we don't use this hanger is that our charge tubes are direct or a more direct shot towards the throttle body, and that just simply restricts airflow. Making bends restricts airflow, so we have to keep ours straight so they do not restrict airflow. And what we essentially do is get rid of this hanger altogether, and we don't use it. We zip tie the hoses together, keep them all clean up out of the way, and we'll zip tie the hose up, and it's simple as that. We don't need any hanger for our kit. We never used one, we never have used one, we probably never will use one. That's one problem that we get a lot of emails about is like, oh, it doesn't fit, this is kinking here, and they're trying to reuse the hangers. In our instructions, our PDF format of our instructions, and we'll definitely cover that in this video, but let's get started. We're gonna get the turbo to the intercooler charge tube first. This car has no muffler on it, so it makes it a little bit easier to work on and easier to film too. We haven't quite gotten to the point of installing this exhaust yet, so it kind of spoils us with having a lot of room to work. You can install these charge tubes with the muffler on. It's super easy still. The one thing I will say is soap and water. I use Windex, anything to help that silicone slide. When silicone's dry, it's super sticky, it's super tacky, it doesn't like to slide across stuff, so it is hard to work with. So we do tell guys to make sure you use plenty of lubricant. So moving up here to the silicone, one thing I want to point out before we install everything is when you're tightening your clamps, you don't want your clamp way up here. You don't want it way down here. You want it about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch below the silicone. So just a little gap right here. And what that does is allows these clamps to fully clamp onto the surface that it's clamping to, whether that's your throttle body, whether it's your intercooler or the turbo itself. You don't want to be clamping on the actual ring of the item, whether that's the throttle body ring, the intercooler ring, or the turbo ring, and that is like the raised lip, per se. You don't want to clamp on that. You want to be right below it so that it can't fall off. The next thing that a lot of guys do is we use these Oticur clamps for our charge tubes, and these are super nice spring-loaded clamps. They're very expensive. They're very high-end. One thing that guys will do is they will go to clamp this, and they will only get it like say that far. But really, this clamp is built to go all the way. So this clamp is supposed to go all the way to the end, and then it can be tightened. If you don't have that, you're likely going to lose your charge tube. It's going to blow off the throttle body. This is the throttle body side. So if you have your throttle body blowing off and you're wondering why, that's why. Any other reason that it'd be blowing off is the clamps just aren't installed correctly or in the right location. So we run this silicone, this clamp clear into the 35, 40 pounds of boost range, no problem. So if you're having an issue, it's usually an installation issue. But if you can't figure it out, definitely email us and we'll help you through that. So let's get started on the install. All right, guys, like I said, we use Windex. We just kind of really spray the inside and spray the outside. And this makes things go way smoother. You can even kind of spray up around it. Anything that this silicone's touching, it will not like to slide. So we're gonna put this on the, honestly, we'll probably just shove it onto the turbo first, and then we'll push it up onto the intercooler. All right, guys, you've seen it in live time. That's with soap and water or Windex or whatever you want to use for lubricant. These do go on extremely easy. So obviously having the muffler off does help a lot too. At this point, I'm going to put the clamps about where I want them, and I'm going to let the Windex dry. It dries pretty quick, and once it's dry, then we'll tighten it. Never tighten your clamps when they're wet. They will slide around, they will mush off of the silicone. They really need to be completely dry before you tighten them. So guys, moving down here, we're gonna cut some of these zip ties and take this Torx out, kind of let these hoses just hang around, and then once we get the silicone charge tube in that goes from intercooler to throttle body, we'll start to resecure the tubes to the charge tube. All right guys, so we're gonna lube this thing up, get it all wet, get the insides of it. And then, like I said, I'll usually spray up here in the car a little bit, the areas that we'll be hitting and rubbing against. And I'll show you how to route this because there is a lot of questions on where these route and how. So the one thing I like to do is this wire right here, I like to go below it. So I like to push it out of the way. We're actually gonna go behind this tube and under this one. So we're gonna come through right here. So our charge tube will be below this tube, behind this tube. Something like that. I don't have it all the way tightened up yet, but I wanted to show you how it goes on and how easy it is with some Windex or soap and water. So the one thing that we get a lot of questions about is, oh, my charge tubes are touching. Oh, the hose is touching the silicone. Silicone can touch each other. It can rub on stuff. That's what it's for. It's built to not wear like a rubber tube. So it can rub on stuff. It's totally fine to do that. It can touch the other silicone charge tube. These are oversized, so they will, you know, my factory one didn't do that. Your factory one didn't flow very well either. So, you know, there's that. That's why we have oversized ones. They'll fit right up like this. Anyone who's having an issue with fitment, all of our silicone is cut in the same one jig. They are all cut in the same jig. It's literally, it's so rare for us to have a silicone cutting issue. It's really almost impossible for them to differ each other. The silicone goes on really that easy. At this point, we're going to tighten the throttle body one up, then we'll move over and pop down the intercooler side, and we'll put that clamp on and push it back on, and it goes that easy. So all them hoses that were up here on the hanger, what I like to do is just kind of secure them to the fuel rail right here. I just, you know, one right, maybe right there, and then one on this end, and that's where I like to secure them hoses up and out of the way, so they're not bouncing around. So now that this is all dry, we're going to tighten the clamp here at the throttle body. This one is very specific to being 9 millimeters wide because there's not much clamping surface on the throttle body, so you can't be using a T-bolt clamp here. Moving on, you need to make sure the gap all the way around the silicone is correct, and then you can start tightening them down. All right guys, now that the charge tubes are all installed, we're going to move on to installing our RPM V2 blow-off valve. There's plenty of videos online of this being installed, but we'll show you real quick what's going on with it. This vehicle does already have the billet port installed because in our previous videos we installed the 120 horsepower blow-off valve kit. So nonetheless, let's move on and get this sucker on here and get it fired up. All right guys, that's easy. So the cool thing about the V2 blow-off valve is that it literally can just, this port can be anywhere it needs to be, wherever relaxed is. So that's one of the cool new features about it. I like to keep my blow-off valves in a downward position. You can run the filter on it. The filter is just a muffler. You don't need to run the filter even in water. We have plenty of water testing videos, so don't worry about any water getting in. This is a boost reference port if you ever need to have a boost gauge hooked up, or a lot of data logging guys use it. It kind of is just an accessory that some use, some don't. It comes plugged. If you need it, it's there. That's the install of the reinforced charge tubes. And like I said, this video will pretty much cover all the charge tubes. This is on a 2020 model again. But that's that. Let's get this thing fired up, make sure we did everything correctly, and that'll be that. All right, guys, that's a wrap for the charge tube and blow-off valve install on our 120 horsepower X3 that we're upgrading here. Like I said, that video can be used for just about any of the X3s as far as charge tubes being installed goes. So we use the reinforced ones. You can pick them up on RPM SxS.com. And at this point, we are done, and we're going to move on to the next portion of the install for the 120 kit. Will probably be exhaust systems. We'll do a couple different ones, and we'll go from there. We can't wait to get this thing ripping.